Hello, and thank you for joining us on For Your Journey. I'm Travis.
And I'm Andrew.
And today we're going to talk about Easter. So what we mean by we're going to talk about Easter is that we're going to talk about Easter traditions. You can go into a store now and see, all the Easter candy and bunnies and Easter baskets.
Yeah,
and
even actually probably a few weeks ago, you could probably see that.
Probably.
Right after Christmas even.
Yeah, like December 26th, it's like Easter stuff.
Yeah.
So obviously those things aren't in the Bible. Easter bunnies and chocolate and candy and eggs and where do some of those traditions come from? What's their history? What's the context of them? Even the date of Easter changes every year. Sometimes it's in March. Sometimes it's in April.
Yeah, and when we
that?
decided we were going to do this, we kind of like looked into some of the research of like where does this stuff come from. Like we didn't know this offhand, so
No, not experts.
But some of what I found was that this tradition of when the date is celebrated goes back to about 325. A church council decided that this should be the date for Easter. And it's like kind of complicated a little bit, like to be honest. So there's this connection with the vernal equinox, a fancy word for spring.
Right.
And then the range of Easter can actually be any time between March 22nd and April 25th. Over a month it can range.
Pretty big range.
And so the first full moon after this vernal equinox is called the Paschal full moon.
Okay.
And Paschal having like some roots in the word Passover.
Right.
And so the first full moon after the vernal equinox is then the last full moon before the Sunday of Easter. So it's pretty tricky. Anyways, it has a movable date, and then a lot of other Christian holidays are based on when Easter is set. So it all sort of stacks on there with Pentecost and Ascension and all those. So there's an interesting connection to Passover. But like one thing I read was that the Passover was intentionally disassociated with Easter as far as date goes.
Okay. Why would that be?
Well, I think with what I was kind of gathering was that the Passover is like connected to Easter in a very significant way. But then like it's no longer this Jewish tradition, but now this Christian tradition.
Right.
And so it needs sort of a new beginning, and it means something different.
Right.
There's some connection, but also something really new and really steep contrast as well.
Right, because Passover, celebrating their deliverance from Egypt and the angel of death passing over their door, where they had the blood on the door and everything. So that's kind of what they were celebrating, commemorating in the Passover celebration, right?
Yeah, and I think that has like an obvious connection with Easter of like we're getting delivered from our sin,
right?
And so that whole Old Testament narrative points to that fact that we're eventually delivered from our bondage, from our the oppression of sin.
In one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7, he indicates like, "For indeed Christ, our Passover, was crucified for us." So he's making that connection.
Yeah, and he's making it pretty explicit. Like, we're not just made up, but like Paul's making that very clear that there is this connection.
Right, because Christ is now our deliverance from our sinful ways and our separation from God.
Right, and the Jews were taught to like memorialize this event, like remember this every year and celebrate this. Through a feast of like no leaven in their households and like cleaning house.
So now in 2015, how do we transfer that celebration and commemoration with chocolate and bunnies and eggs?
Well, I think like most of it like doesn't have that kind of historical root.
Right. I found a lot of it's like very a pagan tradition.
Yeah. Two of the most common ones are like Easter eggs and Easter bunnies. Those are like pretty, they're cruxes of like Easter tradition.
Right.
That's what all the chocolate is shaped like. We've got these plastic eggs.
Got some chocolate too.
Even chocolate in there too.
Oh, at least one.
So like these are like rooted in really pagan traditions. And those pagan traditions were associated with the vernal equinox, with that springtime.
Something I read was about like when you talk about the new moon and cycles of the moon.
Yeah.
They were celebrating like the moon and like the goddess of the moon, believing like fertility.
Yeah.
Because obviously springtime is when winter is past, a new life is coming forth. They were so closely associated that way.
Yeah, and really both bunnies and eggs are kind of associated with fertility. bunnies being that they're so like they're just so abundant and they
Right.
reproduce so quickly.
Right. Where people
yeah.
like make fun of it a lot too. Even.
Yeah. Right. Like breeding like rabbits or, you
Right.
know, like there's all kinds of jokes or, you know, cliches about that. And then eggs like have this obvious sense of like of new life or whatever. Not necessarily that like these things directly were intended to symbolize like the resurrection, but they do have this connection. And like, I think that's where Christians were able to adopt some of them in like in a sensible way.
Something I read about like some of the symbolism that people were associating with eggs was about like how eggs are new life, you know?
Yeah.
And that like an egg coming out of the shell is like symbolizing Christ coming out of the tomb.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, from death to life
Cool
and resurrection.
connection as well.
Obviously, there's no biblical symbolism
Yeah.
linking that with an egg as we
Right.
know an egg, but
Yeah.
Some
And so
connections
then like really it comes down to the core of like, you know, why are we doing these particular traditions and like is it okay to be doing them if they don't have like sound biblical or Christian roots?
or yeah, even further, like if you find out they have pagan roots, which are, you know, is celebrating, you know, a polytheistic culture of many
Yeah.
gods and the sun god and the moon god and all these things.
Yeah. The thing for me is just that like what is it? How is it shaping you, or how is it affecting you? And like, what is the symbolism and the meaning you're giving to that that icon of ideas?
Right. How does it affect you, you know, and impact your decisions and your life now in 2015, regardless of where it came from?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to for all Easter traditions, whether they're grounded in Christian traditions or Jewish heritage or whatever your heritage and whatever your Easter traditions. Like, why are you doing them, and what do they point to for you?
Yeah. So there's always an opportunity to point to Christ. You know, we mentioned that in one of our Christmas time episodes about like seeing the phrase "He's the reason for the season." Like he's the reason for this season, and
Yeah.
hopefully like we keep that throughout our whole year, not just
Yeah.
in seasonal times.
Yeah.
That we focus on him.
And I think that's an interesting connection too about Easter is that while Easter is a specific celebration of the resurrection, the life and death and return of Christ, that's also true of every Sunday. Like every Sunday's a mini Easter.
Right.
And so we should be remembering that he's the reason for every season, every day.
Right, because there's a celebration. There's, you know, new life through absolution and through, you know, Holy Communion,
Yeah.
getting us this power and virtue and
Yeah.
celebrating the body and blood of Him.
Yeah, for sure. So let's keep pressing forward and pointing to Christ. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about Easter. If you have a question or topic for us to discuss in the future, you can find us on Facebook or Twitter.
And we want to take this opportunity to wish you a very happy and blessed Easter this weekend, where you can have intentional moments of celebrating Christ and the new life that He brings. Once again, I'm Travis,
And I'm Andrew.
and this has been For Your Journey.